I am Eleanor Harris, a 73-year-old widow living in a small apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina. On a late summer afternoon, I sat by the window, the pale yellow sunlight filtering through the oak trees that shaded the busy street. The faint scent of jasmine wafted in from the small garden below the building, carrying a feeling both gentle and haunting. I held my cup of tea, looking out, my heart heavy with thoughts about my life, a long series of sacrifices that, I am now not sure, have been as meaningful as I once hoped. My apartment is not large, but every corner holds precious memories. On the walls hang paintings of local landscapes, vivid drawings of the meadows and rivers I loved, interspersed with family photos, moments I try to preserve against the flow of time. There is a photo of George, my husband, in his engineer uniform, a gentle smile and confident eyes. He was the pillar of the family, the man I believed would be with me forever. But the fateful plane crash that year took him away, leaving me and my son, Michael, when he was only 10 years old. That photo always makes my heart ache, both a comfort and a reminder of the irreparable loss. Next to it was a picture of Michael as a child, on the baseball field, his face covered in mud but beaming with laughter. I remembered those days when I was raising my son alone, working hard at Piedmont Trust Bank as an accountant. I was careful with every number, every penny, not only to make ends meet, but also to make sure Michael never felt deprived. I gave up my own dreams, my relaxing evenings, the trips I had dreamed of, just to give it all to my son. I wanted him to have a complete childhood, a bright future, not overshadowed by the shadow of loss. Another photo of me on my accounting graduation day, eyes full of enthusiasm and confidence in the future, makes me smile a little. That is Eleanor in her younger, ambitious years, who thought life would always be fair to her efforts. Now, at 73, I am still proud of the discipline and care that got me through those difficult years. But that pride is accompanied by a haunting question. Have I done enough? Does Michael, the man I have devoted my life to loving and protecting, truly appreciate my sacrifices? I flipped through the old photo album, my fingers lightly tracing each picture. One was of Michael with his wife Laura and their daughter Sophie. Sophie, an 8-year-old with big, bright eyes, was the only light in my life at the moment. Looking at her smile, I felt warm inside, but at the same time, a secret doubt began to creep in. I had spent my life raising Michael, making sure he had a good life, but there always seemed to be an invisible distance between us. I wondered, do I really know my son? Or am I just trying to see him through the lens of a mother who wants to protect, who wants to protect? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, tossing and turning with thoughts of the past and the future. The image of Michael and Laura's cramped house in the suburbs flashed through my mind. Michael had complained about the space, about Sophie needing her own room to study and play. I imagined her growing up in a spacious house with a lush garden and beautiful childhood memories. The thought grew and grew, becoming an irresistible decision. I would use all my retirement savings to buy a new house for Michael's family. This would be the last, most complete gift I could give to my beloved granddaughter and son. This decision was not just an act of generosity. Deep down, I knew it was also a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between Michael and me. I wanted him to see me, not just as a self-sacrificing mother, but as someone who could bring real happiness to his family. I wanted Sophie to have the childhood that Michael had, the childhood that I had worked so hard to create. I wanted to prove that even at 73, I could still do great things for the people I loved. I sat up, turned on the desk lamp, and took out my notebook. I began jotting down ideas for my ideal home: 3 bedrooms, a small garden, close to good schools, not too far from the city center. I calculated a budget, weighing each figure with the care of an accountant. I knew my savings were not small, but they were not unlimited. I would have to give up some personal pleasures, trips to the beach with Margaret, the art classes I had just signed up for, but I believed it would be worth it. The image of Sophie running around the garden, giggling in the sunshine, was my greatest motivator. I told myself that this would be the perfect gift, a way to show my love for Michael's family. But somewhere inside, a small voice warned me of the risks. Would Michael appreciate this gift? Would he understand what I had sacrificed? I pushed those thoughts aside, convincing myself that a mother's love would always be reciprocated. I believed that Michael, though sometimes distant, was still the boy I raised and would still appreciate and be grateful for what I did. The light from the desk lamp fell on my face, the deep lines that bore testimony to years of hardship. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had devoted her life to love and sacrifice. But this time, I felt a new hope. The decision to buy the house was not only a gift to Michael and Sophie, but also a way for me to affirm my value in the eyes of my family. I wanted them to see that I was still a mother, a grandmother who could do miracles. With that thought, I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and went to bed, full of determination and a glimmer of hope. But in my dreams that night, Michael and Laura appeared, not with grateful smiles, but with strange eyes, as if I were an outsider in my own family story. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding. Was I putting too much hope in this gift? Would this sacrifice really bring happiness? Or was it just a desperate attempt to hold on to something that had long since been taken away from me? I had no answer, but I knew I had to keep going. For Sophie, for Michael, and for myself. In the days after I decided to buy a house, my small apartment transformed into a miniature real estate research center. Every night I sat in front of my old laptop, the blue light from the screen reflecting on my face, which was wrinkled by time. My desk was covered with real estate flyers, neighborhood maps marked with colored markers, and notes about prices, square footage, and amenities. I meticulously examined every area of Charlotte, from the old streets of Myers Park with its luxury homes to the more modern neighborhoods of Ballantyne, where the lifestyle was younger and more vibrant. Every detail was carefully considered, as if this were the biggest, last project of my life. I wanted the house to be more than just a place to live, but also an ideal home for Michael, Laura, and especially my beloved niece, Sophie. I envisioned Sophie growing up in a house with a large yard where she could run, play, and dream. I wanted a house with large windows to let in plenty of natural light, a cozy kitchen for Laura, and a quiet workspace for Michael. I thought about high-quality schools nearby, green parks where Sophie could bike, and safe streets for her to walk to school. Every time I thought of Sophie's radiant smile, I felt my resolve strengthened, as if my personal financial worries were dwarfed by my love for my niece. After many nights of research, I decided to focus on the Myers Park area. It was known for its old oak-lined streets, classic homes, and prestigious school system. I imagined how happy Sophie would be to attend a good school and play in a safe, peaceful neighborhood. Myers Park, with its elegant beauty and friendly atmosphere, seemed like the perfect place to realize my dream of a bright future for my son's family. I contacted Susan Carter, a young, energetic real estate agent introduced to me by my best friend, Margaret. Margaret, a warm woman with silver hair and a gentle smile, always advised me to live more for myself. "Eleanor, you've sacrificed too much," she would say, her eyes filled with concern. But I knew Margaret understood that my family was my top priority. Yet every time I talked to Margaret, I felt a pang of guilt, as if I was missing out on something important in my own life. The first call to Susan was formal. I sat on the sofa, holding the phone, trying to sound professional despite my nervousness. "Hello, Ms. Carter," I said, my voice shaking but trying to sound confident. I'm Eleanor Harris. My friend Margaret referred you. I'm looking for a home for my son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter. I paused, took a deep breath, and continued. But this is a secret, Ms. Carter. I want to choose the perfect home myself before I tell them. I explained that I wanted to make it a big surprise, a meaningful gift for Michael's family. But deep down, I knew the real reason. I wanted to control everything. I was afraid that if I involved Michael and Laura from the start, they would make demands that were beyond my financial means, turning the gift into a burden. I wanted the home to be a perfect expression of my love and care, not a negotiation of taste or price. Susan, in a soft but professional voice, replied, I understand what you mean, Eleanor, but usually choosing a home is a major family decision. Should Michael be involved in the process, he may have specific wants or needs. Her words made me a little uncomfortable, as if she were questioning my abilities. I immediately responded more firmly, No need, Miss Carter. I want to make my own choice. My son and daughter-in-law may make demands that are beyond my means. I have a very specific financial plan. I did not want any interference from Michael or Laura at this time. I was afraid that their involvement would complicate things, that they would demand an expensive home, putting me in a difficult position. I wanted everything to go according to my plan, a plan that I had carefully calculated based on what I believed was best for them. To be honest, I felt a little lonely in this decision. Keeping such a big plan a secret sometimes weighed heavily on me. I wondered if this was the best way to go, or if I was unintentionally creating more distance between me and my son. But every time I pictured Sophie in my mind, her radiant smile, her sparkling eyes as she ran through the future garden, I felt all my worries melt away. My love for my granddaughter and my desire to give her a good life became the fire that warmed my heart. I believed that I was doing the right thing, that this gift would be a wonderful surprise, a new beginning for Michael's family. Susan, sensing my determination, didn't ask any more questions. She just nodded over the phone and promised to keep it a secret. I'll send you a list of potential homes today, Eleanor, she said, her voice full of enthusiasm. We'll find the perfect house, I'm sure. I felt a little relieved, as if a burden had been lifted. I hung up and looked out the window, where the afternoon sun was fading. The oak trees swayed gently in the wind, as if whispering encouragement. I closed my eyes, imagining the day I would hand the keys to Michael. Sophie's happy smile as she explored her new room. It was an image I clung to, the reason I kept going. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a vague worry still lurked. I wondered if I was putting too much stock in this gift. Would Michael and Laura really appreciate it, or would they take it for granted? I pushed the thought aside, telling myself that I was doing the best for my family. I turned on my computer and looked at the first list Susan had sent me. Every house was an opportunity, a dream, and I was determined to make that dream come true. The following weeks passed in a hectic but exciting rhythm. Susan Carter, the young real estate agent, and I spent hours looking at homes all over Charlotte. We drove through quiet neighborhoods lined with old oak trees and red brick streets that exuded historic charm. Each house told its own story, from colonials with elegant white columns to modern apartments with large windows. I scrutinized every detail, whether the plumbing was in order, whether the roof had any signs of leaks, whether there was enough natural light in the rooms. I imagined where Sophie would play in the backyard, how Laura would arrange the furniture in the living room, and which corner of the house Michael would choose to work. I wanted everything to be perfect, as if this were my last chance to make my son's family happy. Susan was patient, though I could sometimes sense surprise in her eyes at my thoroughness. You're really thorough, Eleanor, she'd say with a smile when I asked her to double-check a house's electrical system. I just smiled back, but deep down, I knew this was more than just a house-buying exercise. This was my way of showing my love. my attempt to bridge the invisible gap between Michael and me, and the gift I wanted to give Sophie, the kind of childhood I'd tried to give my son. Of the dozens of homes we viewed, one in Dilworth caught my eye. It was a two-story, classically styled house with an elegant cream facade framed by white windows. At first glance, I felt a strange connection, as if this house had been waiting for me. Inside, there were three spacious bedrooms, enough room for Michael's family. The kitchen was open and modern with a large marble island where I imagined Laura preparing family meals. A large window overlooked the small backyard, where rose bushes were in full bloom, giving off a sweet scent. But what I really loved was the backyard. A white picket fence surrounded a lush green lawn, with a small corner filled with bright red roses. I could see Sophie running around on the lawn, her innocent smile sparkling in the sunlight, like a vivid picture in my mind. I stood in the backyard, watching the rose bushes sway gently in the breeze. The scent of roses reminded me of the old days when George and I dreamed of a house like this. We talked about growing old together in a garden filled with flowers, with the laughter of our grandchildren echoing. George is gone now, but I want to bring that dream to Michael and Sophie. I turned to Susan, my voice firm. This one, Susan, I think it's perfect. But the joy didn't last without its worries. The price of the house in Dilworth was close to the top of my budget. It wasn't outrageous, but it forced me to think carefully about my financial future. I sat down at my desk and opened my usual checkbook, where I'd kept track of my savings. If I bought this house, I would have to cut back on the small joys of retirement. The short trips to the beach with Margaret, the art classes I'd signed up for to rediscover a passion of my youth. These things, though small, were the spiritual balm that helped me get through my lonely days. Giving them up made me feel a little regretful, like I was trading a part of myself. I picked up my pen and ran the numbers. If I spent all my savings on this house, I would be left with just my small apartment and a long-term investment, the stocks George had left me, which I had sworn to keep as a legacy to Michael. The last thing I wanted to sell was for the money, but also for the sentimental value. It was all I had left of George, a memory of the years he had worked tirelessly to build a future for our family. But then I saw Sophie, her radiant smile as she ran across the grass, and I said to myself, for Sophie, I would do anything. The internal struggle was intense. Part of me worried about my own financial future. At 73, I had no chance of starting over. What if I ran out of savings? What if I had a health problem or an emergency? But another part, the bigger part, was drawn to the image of a happy family in a new house. I imagined Michael and Laura surprised, hugging me, thanking me for the gift. I pictured cozy family dinners, Sophie playing in the garden in the afternoon, and me, a grandmother, being welcomed into the house with gratitude. That anticipation overcame all my worries and made me feel like I was doing the right thing. I called Susan back, determined. Miss Carter, I want to put the paperwork in place on the Dilworth house. Get the paperwork ready, I'll look it over. Susan agreed immediately, her voice full of enthusiasm. Great, Eleanor. I'll arrange a viewing and get everything ready. You've picked a great house. I hung up, feeling a surge of energy. I looked out at the window at the sunset, where the trees were turning golden. Things seemed to be going well, but somewhere inside me, a small voice still spoke, warning me of the uncertainties. I wondered if I was taking too much of a risk, if this sacrifice would really bring me the happiness I hoped it would. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the image of Sophie and the rose garden. I believed that this house would be the perfect gift, a way for me to affirm my love for my family. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself that everything would be okay. The house in Dilworth would be a new beginning, not just for Michael and Sophie, but for me, a mother, a grandmother who always put family first. I chose a quiet Friday evening to share the big news about the house with Michael. Harper's, a restaurant where George and I had often gone on special occasions, was the perfect choice for the moment. The soft yellow lights illuminated the wooden walls, and the low chatter of the diners created an intimate atmosphere, but my heart was still pounding. I wore the emerald green sweater that Michael had complimented me on, trying to look confident, even though inside I was filled with mixed emotions, excitement and anxiety. I sat there watching the other diners laugh and talk, telling myself that this would be a memorable evening, one in which I would bring great joy to my son. Michael arrived a few minutes late, looking dapper in his usual gray suit, but his eyes were a little tired, perhaps from a stressful day at the bank. I smiled at him, trying to ease the atmosphere by chatting about his work, about his new projects, and even funny stories about Sophie at school. I asked about Sophie's latest painting, about how she had excitedly told stories in art class. Michael smiled back, slightly absent-minded, as if his mind was elsewhere. I waited until the appetizer, the cream of mushroom soup that we both loved, was served, then took a deep breath and decided to get straight to the point. "Michael, son," I said, my voice trembling but determined, "I have something important to tell you." I paused, looking into his eyes, searching for a spark of curiosity or excitement. Michael raised his head, eyebrows raised, waiting. I began to tell him about my plans to buy a house, how I had been thinking about it for a long time, how I had spent nights researching the real estate market, and finally, how I had found the perfect house in Dilworth. I emphasized that I had put in the time and care to find a home that was truly right for him, Laura, and especially Sophie. "I want Sophie to have a great childhood, honey," I said, my voice full of affection. "A place where she can play, learn, and grow up happy." I described the house in Dilworth in detail, a two-story classically styled house with an elegant cream facade, three spacious bedrooms, a modern open kitchen with a large island, and a backyard with blooming rose bushes. I told her how I had imagined Sophie running around in the yard, giggling in the sunshine, and how Michael had dreamed of such a house as a child. "Remember, you said you wanted a yard to play baseball in." I smiled, hoping to evoke fond memories. I looked into Michael's eyes, trying to read his emotions, hoping to see gratitude or joy. But Michael's reaction wasn't what I expected. He listened, but his expression was initially confused, then turned to a hint of disapproval. "Mom, I think we can handle ourselves," he said, his tone trying to sound independent. "You don't have to sacrifice so much. Laura and I are fine with our house, even if it's a little small." His words were like a small stab to my heart. I thought he would be excited, hug me, and thank me for the gift. Instead, he kept his distance, as if he didn't want to take on any more responsibility from me. I tried to stay calm, continued to describe the house in Dilworth, emphasizing that it was not just a house, but an opportunity for Sophie to have a better environment. "I know you said the current house is cramped, Michael. Sophie needs space to grow, to have a room of her own. I have considered it carefully. This house is within my means, and I believe it will bring happiness to your family," I said, my voice full of conviction, hoping to change his mind. Slowly, Michael's eyes changed as I told him about the garden, about the great schools nearby, and how I imagined Sophie playing. He began to nod, a twinkle in his eye. "That sounds wonderful, Mom," he said, his voice less strained. "I think Laura will love the kitchen, and Sophie will love the garden." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, as if I had finally touched his heart. I suggested he come with me to look at the house, and Michael agreed, a small smile appearing on his face. "Okay, Mom, I want to see the house. Maybe you're right, it's the best thing for Sophie." But just as I was starting to feel relieved, Michael added something that made my heart sink. "Mom, I think we should look at some other houses, like Eastover or Myers Park. All my friends are there, and the schools are much better. He said it casually, as if it were just a harmless suggestion, but I knew the prices in those areas were way beyond my budget. I had ruled out Eastover as too expensive, and I had done the math to make sure the Dilworth was the best choice. Michael's suggestion made me feel a twinge of anxiety, as if he didn't really understand my limitations. I tried to explain, my voice soft but firm. Michael, I've thought it through. My budget is limited, and the house in Dilworth is the best option I can afford. It has everything your family needs, and it's close and cozy. But Michael brushed me off, his voice still soft, but somewhat indifferent. Look around. Maybe you'll find a more suitable house. We'll help you out if you need it. His promise of help made me feel uncertain. I knew Michael and Laura couldn't afford to contribute a significant amount, and I worried that they were expecting me to pay for everything, no matter the cost. I smiled awkwardly, nodding to end the conversation. Inside, I felt a twinge of unease. I had hoped Michael would appreciate the gift, that I had put my heart and care into this decision. Instead, he wanted more, something far beyond my means. I told myself that maybe he was just being impulsive, that once he saw the house in Dilworth, he would change his mind. But deep down, a small voice warned me that I was on a risky path. I left Harper's with a heavy heart, but still holding on to the hope that everything would be okay, that Michael would see my love through this gift. That Tuesday afternoon, Charlotte was bright and sunny, but my heart was heavy as I went with Susan, Michael, Laura, and Sophie to look at new homes. After our conversation at Harper's, Michael had convinced me to look at a few more houses in more expensive neighborhoods, like Eastover and Providence Street, even though I had stressed that my budget was limited. Susan, ever the professional, arranged a trip to see some of Michael's suggestions. Though she looked at me with a hint of worry, I knew she sensed my tension, but I wanted to please my son, to believe that he would appreciate the gift if I made a little more effort. We started our trip early in the morning, driving through upscale streets lined with gorgeous homes, manicured trees, and lush lawns. Michael and Laura walked from house to house, commenting on the furnishings, square footage, and neighborhood as casually as if they were picking out an expensive toy rather than a home. Laura kept pointing, praising luxury details like the imported hardwood floors and crystal chandeliers, while Michael nodded, his eyes sparkling with excitement. I tried to keep a straight face, but inside, I felt like I was being swept up in a whirlwind of outsized expectations. Sophie, on the other hand, was the only bright spot on the trip. She ran from room to room, her big eyes sparkling as she explored every corner. "Grandma, this room can be my art studio," Sophie exclaimed, pulling my hand and pointing to a sunny room. Her innocent smile warmed my heart, dispelling some of my insecurities. I smiled at Sophie, stroked her hair, and told myself that everything I did was for her, for the future of my beloved granddaughter. Finally, Susan took us to a house on Providence Street. At first glance, I was overwhelmed. This house was much larger than the one in Dilworth, with modern architecture, marble facades that sparkled in the sunlight. There were 4 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, a double garage big enough for 2 luxury cars, and a separate creative room with large windows overlooking the manicured garden. Laura was instantly captivated. "Oh my gosh, Michael, look at this kitchen. It's my dream," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. She walked around the granite island, touching every surface as if she owned it. Michael seemed pleased too, nodding and talking to Laura about where to put the sofa, what pictures to hang on the walls. They looked like a couple living out a lavish dream, completely oblivious to my presence. I stood silently in the corner of the living room, feeling like an outsider. Susan touched my shoulder and whispered, "Eleanor, this house is a little over your budget. I can show you the Dilworth one if you want." I nodded, but the looks Michael and Laura gave me made me flinch. They were so taken in by the splendor of this house, and I knew that going back to the Dilworth one would be disappointing. I tried to say, Michael, the Dilworth one is beautiful too, and it fits your budget better. But Laura brushed it off, her voice soft but firm. Mom, the Dilworth one is too small. Sophie needs more space, and this area is much better for her future. Michael nodded in agreement. Yes, Mom, this one is a real turning point for us. You should think about it. Their words weighed heavily on me. I knew that the price of the house on Providence was 20% higher than my budget, which meant I would have to sell a portion of my long-term investment portfolio, the stocks of the company George had worked for. I had promised George that I would keep them as a legacy for Michael, but now, with the excitement of my son and daughter-in-law, that promise seemed distant. I felt at a crossroads between my love for my family and my own financial security. Michael stepped closer to me, his voice sweet but calculating. Mom, I know you want the best for us. This house will change Sophie's life. Sell those shares, we'll take care of you anyway. Those words were like a knife to my heart. Take care of? I had spent my whole life taking care of Michael, and now he was talking like I was the one who needed taking care of, when in fact, he wanted me to sacrifice more to meet their ambitions. I tried to convince them to go back to the Dilworth house, but both Michael and Laura insisted that the Providence house was the only option. I felt backed into a corner where the decisions were no longer mine. Finally, I nodded reluctantly, my voice soft. I'll consider it, Michael, but I need time. In my heart, I knew I was giving in, letting love blind me. Susan suggested adding comprehensive insurance to the house, covering structural, plumbing, and other risks. I agreed because, as an accountant, it was only natural for me to be prepared for such risks. But Michael immediately objected. Mom, this house is brand new. There's nothing wrong with it. That insurance is a waste of money, he said firmly, looking annoyed. Laura nodded in agreement. That's right, Mom. We don't need to spend extra money on that. I tried to explain that the insurance would protect them from unforeseen risks, but Michael waved me off. Don't worry, everything will be fine. I reluctantly agreed, though I felt a vague sense of unease. I had seen financial mistakes in my career, and I knew that skipping insurance could have serious consequences. But Michael and Laura's insistence left me with no choice. I told myself that they were probably right, that the new house would be fine, but deep down, I had a bad feeling, as if I had just staked my entire future on an uncertain decision. As I left the house on Providence, I looked at Sophie, holding Laura's hand, pointing excitedly toward the garden. Her smile was the only thing holding me back. I told myself I was doing this for Sophie, for her future. But as I sat in the car, watching the buildings pass by, I couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. Was this sacrifice worth it? Would Michael and Laura really appreciate what I was doing? I didn't have the answers, but I knew I had come too far to turn back. The day I signed the contract to buy the house on Providence Street, I walked into the notary's office with a heavy heart. The room was bright and smelled of fresh paper and coffee, but to me, every corner of the room felt like it was weighing on my mind. I sat across from a thick stack of documents, each page carrying the weight of the decisions and sacrifices I had made. Susan Carter sat beside me, smiling professionally but encouragingly. Michael and Laura were there, their eyes sparkling with excitement, as if they were ready to embark on a new chapter of their lives. But for me, this moment was not only a joy, but also a great sacrifice, making me feel both hopeful and uncertain. The notary, a middle-aged man with a deep, clear voice, read the terms aloud. I listened, trying to concentrate on the numbers and the legal commitments, but my mind was racing. Each signature was a piece of my life. The hard-earned money I'd saved over the years, the personal dreams I'd put on hold, and George's shares, which I'd sworn to keep as a legacy. I looked at Michael, hoping to see a hint of gratitude in his eyes, but he only smiled faintly, as if it were a given. Laura checked her phone, occasionally nodding to Susan as if to confirm that everything was on track. As I signed the final page, transferring ownership of the house to Michael, I felt as if a piece of my heart had been cut away. My fingers trembled, not from fatigue, but from the clear awareness of what I had just given up. My retirement savings, which I had carefully built up to ensure a secure final years, were now nearly depleted. I had sacrificed my financial future to provide a home for my son and granddaughter. Susan noticed my tension, and she gently placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "It's all done, Eleanor. This house has been thoroughly inspected. You can rest assured." Her smile was gentle, but not enough to dispel the unease in my heart. I remembered the debate over the comprehensive insurance package I had proposed. I had tried to convince Michael that it was a safe bet, especially on such an expensive house. But he had waved me off, sounding confident. "Mom, this is a new house. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a waste of money." Laura agreed, nodding nonchalantly. "That's right, Mom. We don't need that." I had given in, though I was still worried. As an accountant, I understood the value of preparing for the unexpected, but in the face of Michael's insistence, I had let my love and desire to please my son override my judgment. Now, sitting in the notary's office, that bad feeling resurfaced, like a warning I couldn't ignore. When all the papers were signed, Susan handed Michael the key to the house. He took it, smiling brightly, and turned to hug Laura. They looked happy, but I didn't feel the gratitude I'd expected. Instead, I saw a shallow satisfaction, as if they'd gotten what they wanted without any effort. I stood up, trying to smile to hide the growing emptiness inside me. "Congratulations," I said, my voice soft but lacking in warmth. Michael replied, "Thank you, Mom. This is a wonderful gift." But his eyes quickly passed me, as if the thanks were just a courtesy. On the way home, I sat silently in the car, staring out the window. The familiar streets of Charlotte passed by, but I felt as if I were in a foreign world. I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The house on Providence, while gorgeous, made me feel more uneasy than ever. I had hoped that this gift would bring our family together, that Michael and Laura would appreciate my sacrifice. Instead, I felt like I had gambled my future on a card I wasn't sure I would win. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The image of Sophie running around the garden kept coming back to me, but it was no longer enough to ease my anxiety. I began to doubt myself. Was I trying to buy my son's love and gratitude? Would this sacrifice really bring them happiness, or would it just raise their expectations, pushing me into a spiral of never-ending demands? These questions swirled in my mind, making me feel suffocated. A small awakening began to grow in me. I realized that giving does not always mean loving. Sometimes, giving too much is indulgence, creating a burden for yourself and unintentionally encouraging irresponsibility in the recipient. I had always believed that my sacrifice was noble, necessary to ensure Michael and Sophie's happiness. But now, a seed of doubt was planted. I wondered if I was being blind, if my love was being taken advantage of without me realizing it. I thought about George, about the years we spent building our family together. He always said that true love was about mutual respect, about giving and receiving. I had forgotten that, about letting my love become an unconditional sacrifice, without boundaries. When I closed my eyes, I saw George's face in my memory, his gentle smile as if to remind me that I was worthy of love, not only as a mother, but as a person. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my heavy thoughts. It was all done. The house was Michael's. I could only hope that my bad feeling was wrong, that this sacrifice would be rewarded with the happiness of my son and granddaughter. But deep down, I knew that something had changed and that I was standing on a new threshold where things might never be the same again. Michael's housewarming party took place on a sunny Saturday afternoon, just weeks after closing on the Providence Street house. The house was warmly lit, jazz music playing, and the laughter of about 40 guests. From Michael's bankers to Laura's stylish friends, Laura had carefully curated the table, laden with sumptuous dishes, grilled lobster, brie toast, and glasses of sparkling wine. I stood in the middle of the bustle, in my simple beige wool coat, trying to blend into the scene, but feeling a mixture of pride and loneliness, hope and doubt. I quietly helped Laura set the table, making sure the cookie plates and cheese trays were neatly arranged. Guests passed by, smiling and complimenting. "What a beautiful house! Congratulations to Michael and Laura. Eleanor is so kind. What a mother you are." These words, which should have warmed my heart, only made me feel out of place. I realized they were just polite remarks, not a trace of sincere gratitude. Laura was busy showing off the expensive furniture, the Italian leather sofa, the imported walnut dining table, all bought with my extra money. She talked about how hard she had worked to choose each item, completely ignoring my presence, as if I were some invisible maid. Michael was busy impressing his boss and his partners, standing in the middle of the living room, laughing and talking loudly about our new house and his big plans for the future. He never once looked in my direction, not once said thank you, not even a nod. In that lavish and noisy environment, only Sophie brought me some comfort. She held my hand, pulling me around the house to show me her new room. "Grandma, look how beautiful my room is. I even have a corner to draw," Sophie exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. I smiled, stroking her hair, feeling my heart warm. Sophie's innocent smile, her innocence and unconditional love, were the only reason I still felt like I was doing the right thing. I imagined her growing up in this room, drawing colorful pictures, living a childhood filled with joy. But even that comfort was not enough to dispel the growing emptiness in my heart. As the party drew to a close, I went into the kitchen to get another tray of cupcakes. The kitchen door was ajar, but Laura and Michael's voices drifted through the living room, clear and sharp. "Your mother is a financial burden," Laura said, her tone blunt and contemptuous. "She thinks about us, but she's just making things worse. Now that her money's gone, we don't need her help anymore." My heart sank. My breath caught in my chest. I stood there, the tray shaking in my hands. Michael replied, his voice indifferent and sympathetic. "Yeah, she thinks she's the center of the universe. We don't need her so much in our lives anymore. Just let her live her life in peace." Their words were like knives stabbing into my heart. The tray of cakes in my hands fell to the floor. The sound of metal hitting the tiles rang out dryly, breaking the silence in the kitchen. Financial burden? Unnecessary? I had sacrificed my whole life for Michael, from the sleepless nights working to pay for school fees to selling George's shares, the last thing I kept as a memento of my husband. I had given up my own dreams, my small joys, just to give him a better life. And now I was considered a burden, an unnecessary person in the very family that I had poured my heart into building. Pain coursed through my chest, but no tears fell. Instead, a suppressed anger flared up, stronger than any sadness. I felt as if my world had collapsed, but at the same time, a new strength was rising within me. I was no longer the resigned mother, always ready to sacrifice unconditionally. I had spent my life putting Michael's happiness above all else, but now I realized that my love had been used, taken for granted. My face was pale, my eyes dry but filled with an unquenchable fire. I walked out of the kitchen, not bothering to pick up the tray. The jazz music was still playing, the laughter of the guests was still bustling, but everything seemed blurred before my eyes. I stood in the middle of the living room, my eyes scanning Laura and Michael, who had jumped at the sound of the tray falling. They looked at me, their faces slightly confused, but I didn't give them a chance to speak. A heavy silence fell, as if the whole room were holding its breath. I knew that this moment would change everything, that I could no longer live in the shadow of blind sacrifice. I took a deep breath, my voice, though trembling, still clear. Michael, Laura, I heard everything you said. I paused, letting the silence sink in. I have devoted my whole life to loving and sacrificing for you. I gave up everything, my dreams, my money, even your father's mementos, just to give you a good life. But today, I realize that it was all for nothing. You see me as a burden, as someone you don't need, so I won't let myself be hurt anymore. Laura paled, tried to speak, but I held up a hand. Michael stood still, his eyes wavering between shame and confusion. Mom, you misunderstood, he stammered, but I didn't let him continue. No, Michael, I didn't misunderstand. I saw clearly who you were, and I won't let myself be manipulated again. I turned and walked out of the house, through the crowd of astonished guests. Each step was a release, even if painful. The door slammed shut behind me, severing the link to a past filled with sacrifice and hurt. I had reached my limit, and for the first time in my life, I chose myself. I returned to my small apartment, exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The apartment, which had always been a safe haven, now felt strangely empty. The streetlights streaming through the windows cast long shadows on the floor, adding to the sense of loneliness. I sank down on my usual sofa, my hands trembling in my lap, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. Michael and Laura's harsh words at the housewarming party echoed in my head. Financial burden. Unnecessary. I had sacrificed my entire life for my son, from working all night to pay for his tuition to selling George's shares, my husband's last memento. In return, I had received only contempt and ingratitude. The pain was like a huge wave, drowning all reason. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe deeply to calm myself, but my chest was still heavy. I wondered where I had gone wrong. Had I lived the wrong way, loved the wrong way? I had always believed that my sacrifice was necessary, the way to ensure Michael and Sophie's happiness. But now, I felt like I had lost myself in the process. The apartment was silent, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall, a reminder that time was still passing, even as my heart was breaking. Just then, the doorbell rang. I was startled, wondering who could be coming at this hour. I opened the door and saw Margaret, my best friend, standing there with a worried look on her face. Margaret, with her silver hair and warm eyes, seemed to have sensed that something was wrong. She didn't ask anything, just walked in quietly, placing a bag of freshly baked cookies and a pot of hot tea on the table. The smell of vanilla cookies and chamomile tea wafted through the air, making me feel a little comforted, as if Margaret's presence was an embrace in the midst of my emotional storm. Margaret sat down next to me and patted me on the shoulder affectionately. Eleanor, she said, her voice warm and sympathetic, you've lived too much for others. Now it's time for you to live for yourself. She didn't ask what had happened, didn't press me to tell her. Instead, she told funny stories, memories of our youth, like the time we went to the beach and lost our sandals, or the time I painted her portrait in art class. Margaret reminded me of hobbies I'd put aside, short trips to the beach, afternoons spent reading at the library, the drawing classes I'd loved. Remember, Eleanor, you were such a good painter when you were young. You dreamed of traveling around painting landscapes, she said, her eyes sparkling as if to awaken a part of me that had fallen asleep. I sat quietly, listening to Margaret, feeling my heart slowly calm down. Her words were like a cool breeze, clearing away some of the dark fog in my mind. But the pain was still there, like a scar that had not healed. Just then, my phone vibrated. I looked at the screen, a text message from Sophie. Grandma, I love you. Are you okay? I miss you so much. Her simple, innocent words were like precious medicine. I smiled, feeling my heart warm again. Sophie, with her unconditional love and innocent smile, was the only remaining light in my collapsing world. Her text reminded me that there were still people who loved me truly, not because of what I could give. I picked up my phone, read Sophie's message over and over again, feeling a small glimmer of hope. Margaret, noticing the change in my face, smiled. See, Eleanor, there are still beautiful things worth cherishing. Sophie loves you, and you need to love yourself, too. Her words were like an affirmation, helping me regain my composure. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest lighten. I began to realize that my worth was not in the money I had sacrificed or the gifts I had given away. My worth was in who I was, in the sincere love I gave to those who truly appreciated me. Margaret's conversation lasted late into the night. She told me about her plans, a trip to Asheville to see the fall foliage, a pottery class she'd signed up for. You should come with me, Eleanor, she said, her voice full of excitement. You need to find your joy, find yourself. I nodded, not making any specific promises, but deep down, I knew she was right. I'd lived for too long for others. Let my happiness depend on the gratitude of Michael and Laura. Now I needed to learn to put myself first. When Margaret left, I sat alone in the apartment, holding a cup of cold tea. I looked out the window where the street lights still shone. The pain was still there, but it was no longer the only thing that defined me. I thought of Sophie, of her smile, and of Margaret's words. An awakening was growing within me. I didn't want to be the mother who only knew how to sacrifice, who only knew how to give without receiving. I wanted to find the Eleanor of the past, the woman who had dreams, who loved to paint and go to the beach. I wanted to live for myself, even if only for the last days of my life. I stood up, opened my old notebook, and wrote a line. Learn to love yourself. It wasn't a promise, but a reminder. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that the wounds of Michael and Laura would take time to heal. But for the first time in years, I felt a real glimmer of hope, not for my family, but for myself. I closed my eyes, letting the ticking of the clock lull me to sleep, with a new determination. I wouldn't let myself be hurt again. I deserved to be happy. In the days after the housewarming, I was in a strange state, part pain, part awakening. My small apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a cage of heavy thoughts. I sat on the sofa, looking at family photos on the wall. George's smile, Michael's mischievous gaze as a child, Sophie's wide eyes. But now the images no longer brought me the joy they once did. They reminded me of the sacrifices I had taken for granted, of Michael and Laura's harsh words, financial burden, unnecessary. I wondered if I had really been wrong to spend my life loving and sacrificing for my son, or if I had blindly believed that my love would be reciprocated. I tried to find peace by returning to my old routines. I read, watered the plants, and cleaned the apartment, but nothing seemed to matter. The pain followed me like a shadow. I thought of Sophie, of her innocent smile, and wondered if I had been too hard on myself by deciding to cut off my sacrifice for Michael's family. But then I remembered Margaret's words. You have to live for yourself, Eleanor. Those words were like a small light flickering in the darkness of my soul. One morning, I decided to get out of the apartment for a change of scenery. I went to Freedom Park, where I usually found peace and quiet among the oak trees and the chirping of birds. That day, the park was deserted, with only a few people walking and a group of children playing in the distance. I chose a bench under the shade of an ancient oak tree and opened the book I had brought with me, an old novel that I had long abandoned. I tried to concentrate on the words, but my mind kept drifting back to what had happened at the housewarming party. As I was lost in thought, I noticed an elderly man with white hair sitting on the stone bench opposite me. He was holding a thick book on botany, his sharp eyes scanning the pages. I glanced at him, then returned to my book. After a moment, he raised his head and smiled at me. "Hello," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "Are you reading a good book?" That simple question opened an unexpected conversation. He introduced himself as Harold Brooks, a retired history teacher who now spent his time tending his herb garden. We talked about books, about life, and eventually about the losses we had each experienced. Harold told me about his passion for plants, how he found joy in caring for rare herbs. He shared about his days as a teacher, about the students who had left their mark on him, and about the loneliness after his wife died. I felt a strange connection with Harold. He listened to me sincerely, without judgment, without asking for anything in return. I told him part of my story, about how I had sacrificed my life for my family, and how I felt hurt by Michael and Laura's careless words. Harold just nodded, his eyes full of sympathy, as if he understood my pain. "Eleanor," he said, his voice deep, "sometimes we give so much that we forget ourselves. But you deserve to live for yourself, to find the joys you have missed." His words were like a cool breeze, blowing a little hope into my soul. Harold invited me to visit his herb garden one afternoon. "I have many rare plants, and I think you will enjoy the quiet," he said, his eyes sparkling with sincerity. I agreed, not out of curiosity about the garden, but because I sensed in Harold a rare kindness, a friend who could help me find the light again. Meeting Harold felt refreshing, like I was opening a door I had long closed. But just as I was beginning to feel at peace, my phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was anxious, far from his usual confident self. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse, "the house on Providence, it's in big trouble. A water main broke, damaging the ceiling and the wood floors downstairs. Water is everywhere, everything is in ruins, and to make matters worse, my insurance doesn't cover this kind of damage." He spoke hurriedly, almost pleadingly. "Can you help us? We need a lot of money to fix it right away, or the house will get worse." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. I had warned Michael against buying comprehensive insurance, but he had brushed me off. Now my worst fear had come true. "Michael," I said, my voice firm, "I've made it clear. I spent most of my savings on that house for you. I told you to get insurance, but you wouldn't listen. Now there's nothing I can do to help. You and Laura have to take responsibility for your own decisions." Despite my tough exterior, I felt a pang of pity for Michael, and especially concern for Sophie. I imagined her living in a broken home, and my heart sank, but I knew I couldn't give in anymore. If I gave in again, I would be trapped in a cycle of exploitation. I remembered Margaret's words, "You have to live for yourself." I remembered Harold's sincere gaze, reminding me that I deserved to be happy. I couldn't keep being a life preserver for people who couldn't swim. Michael was silent on the other end of the line, then whispered, "I understand, Mom. I'll figure something out." He hung up, and I sat back on the bench, looking out at the park. The birds were chirping, the sunlight was filtering through the trees, but I no longer felt lost. I had made an important decision, to protect myself. I knew Sophie still needed me, and I would always love her. But with Michael and Laura, I had to set boundaries. I stood up, picked up the book, and walked away with a sense of relief. I was learning to love myself, and that was the first step toward finding the light again. The morning after Michael's call, I sat with a cup of chamomile tea, trying to concentrate on the morning paper, but my mind kept returning to my son's panicked words. The image of Sophie living in a house ruined by a burst water pipe made my heart ache. I wondered if I had been too hard on myself, if I had abandoned my beloved niece. But then Margaret and Harold's words echoed in my head, reminding me that I couldn't continue to sacrifice endlessly. I needed to protect myself, to learn to set boundaries, no matter how painful it was. Just then, the doorbell rang repeatedly, interrupting my train of thought. I stood up, a bad feeling running down my spine. When I opened the door, I saw Laura standing there, her face pale, her eyes dark, a far cry from her usual elegance. She was dressed simply, her hair tied in a hasty bun, looking tired and worn. Without waiting for my invitation, Laura walked straight into the apartment, her eyes sweeping my small space as if assessing it. I closed the door, trying to remain calm, but mentally preparing myself for a confrontation. "Eleanor," Laura began, her voice shaking, as if trying to sound apologetic. "I'm sorry about what I said at the housewarming party. I didn't mean it. I'm just so stressed about moving. Everything's been so overwhelming. I didn't want to hurt you." She looked at me, her eyes pitiful, but I could sense the lie in every word. Laura went on to describe the damage to the house: the peeling ceilings, the water-rotted wooden floors, the musty smell everywhere. She insisted that they couldn't afford repairs, that Michael had become irritable, that Sophie was upset about the destruction of her living space. "Can you help us?" she said, her voice urgent. "You have this apartment. You can sell it to help us. It's small anyway. You can move in with us when the house is done. We'll take good care of you." Laura's proposal stunned me. Sell my apartment, the only place I had left, the place that held my memories of George, my moments of peace, to continue providing for them. Her promise of care sounded like a trap, a lure to give up everything I had left. I stayed silent, letting Laura finish, watching her face change from pleading to impatience. When she paused, I took a deep breath, my voice calm but firm. "Laura, I've made it clear to Michael. I spent most of my savings on that house for the kids. This apartment is all I have left. This is where I'm going to spend the rest of my life." Laura's attitude changed instantly. Her face turned cold, her eyes flashing with anger. "If you don't help, Sophie will suffer," she almost shouted. "Do you want your granddaughter to live in a broken house? Do you want her to change schools because we can't afford to fix it? Do you really love Sophie?" Laura's words were like a sharp knife, aimed straight at my weakest point: my love for Sophie. I felt my heart tighten. The image of her standing in the flooded house appeared clearly, but I knew she was manipulating me, using my feelings to achieve her goals. I stood up straight, looking Laura straight in the eye. "Laura," I said, my voice unwavering, "I love Sophie more than anything, but I can't keep sacrificing everything to make up for your and Michael's mistakes. You chose not to have insurance. You chose a house I couldn't afford. Now you're responsible." My words were like a wall, blocking Laura's efforts. She looked at me, her face red with anger, then turned and left without another word. The door slammed shut, leaving me in a heavy silence. I sat down on the sofa, holding my chest, trying to ease the pain that was rising. Sophie's image still haunted me, but I knew I couldn't give in. If I gave again, I would be prey to their selfishness. I needed help to strengthen my resolve. I picked up the phone and called Harold Brooks, my new friend I'd met at Freedom Park. I told him the whole story, from Laura's fake apology to how she tried to take advantage of my love for Sophie. Harold listened patiently, without interrupting, his voice deep as he replied, "Eleanor, love is not blind sacrifice. Your children and grandchildren may take advantage of it. You need to maintain clear boundaries. Michael and Laura are responsible for their own decisions. If you keep giving, you will never get out of this vicious cycle." Harold's advice was like a cool breeze, strengthening my resolve. He reminded me of my worth. of how I deserved to live a life free from unreasonable demands. You should come to my garden, he said, his voice full of excitement. I just planted a new lavender bush. It will help you relax. I smiled into the phone, feeling a little relieved. Harold was not just a friend, but also a moral support, helping me see the path ahead. After the call, I stood up and walked out onto the small balcony of my apartment. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak trees, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill my lungs. I knew I had made the right decision, even though it was painful. I could no longer be Michael and Laura's constant financial resource. Sophie was still the light of my life, but I had to love her in a way that didn't hurt me. I looked out at the busy street and felt a new freedom. I was learning to put myself first, and while the road was long, I knew I was on the right track. A week after my tense confrontation with Laura, I tried to find some semblance of normalcy in my small apartment. I started my day with my usual cup of chamomile tea, reading the newspaper, and tending to the small potted plants on the balcony. But my worries about Sophie continued to haunt me. The image of her living in a house damaged by flooding made my heart clench. I wondered if I was being too harsh, if I was punishing my niece for her parents' mistakes. But Margaret and Harold's advice kept ringing in my head, reminding me that I could no longer be a lifeline for Michael and Laura's bad decisions. Lost in thought, the doorbell rang, not as urgently as Laura had, but softly, almost hesitantly. I opened the door, and there stood Michael. He looked more haggard than ever. His hair was disheveled, his clothes were disheveled, and his eyes were red with exhaustion. He no longer had the confidence or arrogance he had once had, and he stood there, shoulders slumped, like someone who had just weathered a storm. I invited him in, my voice calm but distant. "Sit down, Michael," I said, gesturing to the sofa opposite. He sat down, his hands clasped together, his eyes downcast, as if struggling to find the words. For a long time he was silent. Only the ticking of the clock echoed in the quiet room. Finally, he raised his head, his voice hoarse. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I was wrong." Those words, though simple, were like another stab, not because of the pain, but because of the unexpected sincerity in his voice. I sat still, waiting for him to continue, not wanting to interrupt. "The house on Providence Street was a big deal to repair, Mom," Michael began, his voice shaking. "It was worse than I thought. The ceiling downstairs was almost collapsed. The wood floors were rotten, and the smell of mold made it uninhabitable. Laura and I fought constantly about it. She blamed me, and I didn't know what to do." He paused, took a deep breath. Sophie was affected too. She kept asking why the house was falling apart, why she didn't have a studio anymore. It broke my heart to look at her. His voice broke, and I saw tears rolling down his cheeks, something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "We had to sell the house, Mom," he continued, his voice filled with shame. "We didn't get the price we wanted, but we had no choice. Now we're back in our old house in the suburbs." He bowed his head as if he couldn't meet my eyes. "I was wrong not to listen to you about the insurance. I let Laura talk me into it, and I was too greedy to want that expensive house. And the things I said at the housewarming party, they were stupid and thoughtless. I never meant to hurt you. I know you sacrificed your life for me, and I didn't appreciate it." I listened, my heart wavering between sympathy and still simmering pain. Michael's apology seemed sincere, but it couldn't erase the scars he and Laura had left. I thought about the years I'd spent supporting him, the sleepless nights I'd spent calculating the bills, the shares of George's I'd sold. But I also saw in Michael's eyes a genuine remorse I'd never seen before. He didn't make excuses, he didn't blame, he just admitted his mistake. I took a deep breath, my voice calm but firm. "Michael, I forgive you. I have always loved you, and that will never change." But you have to understand that our relationship has changed forever. I paused, looking him straight in the eye. I gave you so much, sacrificed everything without setting boundaries. But that was not good for either of us. You and Laura must learn to take responsibility for your lives. I cannot and will not continue to be your financial lifeline. Michael nodded, his eyes full of acceptance, though still a little hurt. I understand, Mom, he said, his voice low but firm. I'll try. I promise I'll let Sophie see you more often, and I won't let Laura interfere. I want to start over to prove that I can stand on my own. He looked at me, as if waiting for a sign that I still believed in him. I smiled slightly, not with joy, but with relief. I felt a weight lifted. Forgiving Michael didn't mean forgetting what had happened, but accepting reality and moving on. I had learned that love didn't mean endless sacrifice. I needed to protect myself, not just for myself, but so I could continue to be a strong grandmother to Sophie. I believe you can do it, Michael, I said, but you have to prove it with your actions, not just your words. He stood up and walked over to hug me. His hug was no longer that of a boy needing his mother's protection, but that of a man learning to deal with his mistakes. When he left, I sat on the sofa, looking out the window. The golden afternoon sunlight filtered through the oak trees, bringing with it a sense of peace. There was still a rift between Michael and I, but I believed it was a necessary rift so that we could rebuild a healthier relationship, one based on respect and responsibility. I thought of Sophie, of her smile, and felt a glimmer of hope. I knew I would always be there for her, but in a way that would not harm myself. I opened my notebook and wrote a line: "Forgive, but do not forget." It was a reminder to myself that I was worthy of love and respect. I had changed from a resigned mother to a strong woman who knew her worth. The road ahead may not be easy, but I knew I was ready to move forward, with a lighter heart and a new belief in myself. A few weeks after my emotional encounter with Michael, a strange sense of peace began to creep into my life. The pain of Michael and Laura's harsh words was still there, like a faint scar, but it no longer dominated my mind. I learned to accept reality, to let go of unrealistic expectations of love and gratitude from my son. My small apartment, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the faint scent of jasmine from the garden below, became a place where I found myself again. I began to tend the potted plants on the balcony more, read more books, and even re-enrolled in the painting class I had abandoned. The clumsy strokes on paper brought me a simple joy that I had long forgotten. One afternoon, as I was making tea and getting ready to read a new book, the phone rang. It was Harold Brooks, a new friend I had met at Freedom Park. His voice was deep and warm. "Eleanor, I've been thinking about a trip to Myrtle Beach. A little sea breeze and sunshine would be good for the soul. Would you like to come with me? I think you deserve a break." Harold's invitation came like a cool breeze, blowing away the remaining dark clouds in my heart. I agreed without hesitation. "Harold, thank you. I'd love to go." I smiled, feeling an excitement I hadn't felt in years. Just a few days later, I was standing on the balcony of a rental apartment in Myrtle Beach, breathing in the salty ocean breeze, the sound of waves lapping, the distant cries of seagulls, and the golden sunlight shining on my face, a promise of new beginnings. The apartment was small but cozy, with large windows overlooking the deep blue ocean. I spent my early mornings walking on the beach, feeling the fine sand between my toes, picking up colorful seashells. I brought a sketchbook with me, trying to sketch waves and horizons, even though my strokes were clumsy. Each brushstroke was a step toward finding the Eleanor of old, the woman who used to be dreamy and optimistic. Harold was a wonderful companion. He told fascinating stories of his youth, of his travels across the country, and of the herb garden he tended like a work of art. We dined at seaside restaurants, ate fresh lobster and grilled fish, and laughed about simple things like how he burned a batch of cookies or how I accidentally spilled sand in my bag. Harold was not just a friend, but also a reminder that there was still much to discover, even at 73. Eleanor, you have a strong heart, he said one evening as we sat on the beach watching the sunset. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. His words were like medicine, helping me to believe in myself. Meanwhile, Sophie kept in touch with me via video calls. She talked about school, about new games with her friends, and showed me colorful drawings she had just finished. Grandma, I drew you standing on the beach, Sophie exclaimed, holding up a picture of a silver-haired woman by the waves. I smiled, feeling my heart warm. Sophie's love, innocent and unconditional, was the most precious thing I had. I knew that despite the changes in my relationship with Michael, my love for her remained the same. Michael called to check in, not often, but enough to let me know he was trying. His voice was less strained, more mature. He told me about how they had settled back into their old house in the suburbs, about how he was looking for a part-time job to help pay the bills. I'm trying, Mom, he said, his voice sincere. I want to make you proud. I didn't respond with promises, just nodded into the phone. I know, Michael. Keep trying. I no longer expected him to be the perfect son, but I did hope he would learn to take responsibility for his own life. Every day in Myrtle Beach was a day of freedom. I was no longer bound by the expectations of Michael and Laura, no longer guilty of putting my own needs first. I walked along the beach, letting the waves wash away old pain. I painted, not to create perfect works, but for the joy of creating. I talked with Harold, laughed, and realized that life was still worth living, even after 3/4 of a century. As the sun set, painting the sky and the sea a golden yellow, I stood on my balcony, feeling the cool breeze. I thought about my journey, from a mother who sacrificed everything to a woman who learned to love herself. My relationship with Michael may never be the same again, but I accepted that. The rift was necessary, so I could stand firm and find my own happiness. I was no longer a financial burden or an unwanted person. I was Eleanor Harris, a strong, independent woman, learning to live life to the fullest. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the waves soothe my soul. I found light, not in the gratitude of others, but in my own heart. Myrtle Beach, with its vast ocean and warm, sunny days, had opened a new chapter in my life. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready to live for myself, to enjoy the remaining days with joy and serenity. My days in Myrtle Beach brought me a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of the waves, the sunlight streaming through the windows of my small apartment, and the faint smell of salt in the air. I stood on the balcony, breathing deeply, feeling the cool breeze blowing through my silver hair. At 73, I never thought I would find such a strong joy in life. Harold Brooks, with his sincerity and simple stories, became a wonderful companion, helping me discover the small corners of happiness that I had long forgotten. I spent time walking along the beach, picking up shiny shells and sketching them in my sketchbook. My brush strokes were still clumsy, but each stroke was a step toward reconnecting with myself, the younger Eleanor who had dreamed of travel and painted landscapes. Harold would join me, carrying his herb notebook, showing me how to tell lavender from rosemary, or telling me about the mint he grew in his garden. Eleanor, you have the hands of an artist, he would say, his eyes twinkling as he looked at my sketches. The compliment, simple as it was, made me smile, feeling appreciated not for what I had given, but for who I was. In the afternoons, we sat at seaside eateries, ate fresh seafood, and talked about everything from politics to literature to unfulfilled dreams. Harold told me about a trip to Italy he had dreamed of standing in front of the Colosseum and painting it at sunset. I shared my youthful dream, a trip across America to paint mountains and prairies. It's never too late, Eleanor, Harold said encouragingly. You still have time to live those dreams. His words were a reminder that there were still pages of my life left to write, and I had the right to write them. Sophie is still the light of my life. She video calls me every day, showing me new drawings or telling me about her school games. Grandma, today I drew a ship at sea, just like where you live, Sophie exclaims, holding up a colorful picture. I smile, feeling my heart warm. Sophie's love, innocent and unconditional, is the motivation to keep going. Michael calls too, not often, but enough to let me see that he is trying to change. He tells me about finding a part-time job, about his efforts to settle into his old house. I want to make you proud, he says, his voice more sincere than before. I don't promise anything, just say softly, I know, Michael. Keep trying. I no longer expect him to be the perfect son, but I do hope he learns to take responsibility. One evening, sitting on the beach with Harold, watching the sunset tint the water, I realized I had changed. I was no longer the self-sacrificing mother who always put the happiness of others before her own. I had learned to set boundaries, to love myself, and to find joy in simple things. Myrtle Beach, with its vast ocean and warm, sunny days, had become a symbol of my freedom. I was no longer bound by Michael and Laura's expectations, no longer guilty of choosing to live for myself. I think about my journey, from a woman who sacrificed everything for her family to a woman who learned to love herself. The scars from Michael and Laura's betrayals are still there, but they no longer hurt. Instead, they are reminders of the strength I have found,